I'm a climate scientist who studies the extreme weather events that we experience and see in today's climate, and also extreme weather events that are becoming more frequent or more intense, or both in the future because of human-induced climate change. In my working hours, I spend a lot of time studying heat waves and their impacts on our health, well-being, and lives. I've been doing this research for 8 years, and before doing this, I did other things in other universities. I was an undergraduate student in physics and astronomy, and in my final year project, I helped calibrate telescopes in Namibia so that scientists could detect light sources from outer space better. And then I did a PhD in climate science, in which I studied things in the second layer of the atmosphere called the stratosphere. And now, of course, I do research about extreme events and their impacts on the ground. So academically, I've moved from space to the Earth's atmosphere to now being on the ground. And this is where I like to stay for my research, because this is about us humans in a variable and changing climate with a very uncertain future. I'm afraid, in general, that climate change is bad news for all of us. If we take heat waves as an example, they can harm or kill people. Heat waves can cause a heat stroke, which is a medical emergency. Exposure to extreme heat can also worsen lung or heart conditions, and in the worst cases, it can cause death. The people who are most vulnerable to extreme heat impacts are the elderly and very young children. On average, in England alone, every year we have about 2,000 excess deaths associated with heat waves every year. And UK summers are getting hotter in a warming climate. That means that we expect our health and well-being to be more negatively affected by heat in a warming climate in the future. Some studies estimate that by the end of this century, the UK could have up to 10,000 extreme heat deaths every year. So this is a number 5 times the number we have currently. But this 10,000 number only considers future climate change. So if we also consider other things like an expanding population or an aging population, which means that more of us will be exposed to extreme heat in the UK in the future, and also more of us will be of a vulnerable age group, then this 10,000 estimate could double or even triple by the end of this century. And these numbers are terrifying. But on the other hand, if we limit global warming, then we can be saving lives. A few years ago, I published a paper comparing 2 different worlds in terms of how many lives we could be saving by limiting global warming. I had one world, which is that all the world's governments adhere to this 1.5-degree warming target above the pre-industrial levels. And I have another world, which is that we all continue doing whatever we're doing, and the globe gets warmer. I focused on this first world, which is 1.5-degree warming, because this is the global warming limit set in the Paris Climate Agreement. Nearly all of the world's governments and countries have signed up to this agreement. So this paper came out in 2019. This is what I wrote as the headline result. That achieving 1.5-degree threshold could avoid between 100 and 3,000 annual heat-related deaths per city in the United States. I was focusing a lot in the United States back then because the United States was pulling out of this international Paris Agreement. In fact, it is going to withdraw from this Paris Agreement once again in January 2026. Any setback to limiting global warming to our collective goal is going to cost lives. And this includes lives in countries that are pulling out of this very important international climate agreement. I gave this talk about this paper a few years ago in a conference. And usually after a talk, people came up to me and ask questions or say they like to collaborate and so on. But this one time, an American scientist came up to me and said that my talk made him very emotional. And that's because he was thinking about his grandma when I was giving a talk. In my talk, I had talked about different cities in the United States, including a place called Detroit. And his grandma lived there. And I had mentioned that in Detroit, in a warming climate, we will expect about 1,400 deaths from heat waves every year. but nearly half of these deaths can be avoided if we just limit global warming. He was very concerned about his grandma, and the talk was very personal to him because of his personal connection to a loved one. Obviously, the facts about climate change are rooted in the best available science. But it's not just about numbers or people very far away from us or in other countries. It's about people, ourselves, and people we care about. Sometimes we might like to think when we're living in our quite comfortable homes, especially if we live in richer countries like the UK or the US, that we're exempt from climate change impacts. But that's very far from the truth. The truth is that you and I probably remember the very hot 40-degree heat wave in the UK 3 years ago in July 2022. I remember that very well because I was quite ill that week because my flat got quite hot and there was not a lot of ventilation. You probably have had sleepless nights because your bedroom just got hot in the summer. And all of us know people, be it friends or family or neighbors or co-workers, who are older, who may work outdoor jobs that are demanding and can't escape from any heat, who may be pregnant or have young children to look after, who may have long-term physical or mental health conditions that are made worse because of extreme heat. So it's very important to think about our daily lives and lived experiences during an extreme heat event in a changing climate. Last year or so, I led a team of scientists to study exactly this. So we teamed up with a health cohort called Children of the 90s. And its other name is the Avon Longitudinal Study for Parents and Children. It's about following the health and well-being of parents and children in the Bristol area since the early 1990s. This is an ongoing study that's nearly as old as me, and is still producing a wide range of great research in the health space. We sent out the first ever heatwave survey to these cohorts to ask about their lives. We received over 3,000 responses, and I'm still very grateful for the participation of all of our respondents. From these responses, we found a few things. Nearly 70% of our respondents had worse sleep during a heat wave. Nearly 40% of them said they had lower productivity in their life, and about 30% of them said they had a worse appetite. So sleep, appetite, and productivity, these are things that are highly linked to our health and well-being, but also things like sleep affect our interpersonal relationships. Things like lower productivity, by extension, can affect the functioning of our society. Now, these children of the 90s are now in their mid-30s. Some of them have their own children. So in our responses, we saw a lot of worries from these responses about their loved ones. Some of them said they were worried about not being able to keep their baby cool in a heat wave. Some of them were worried about their parents and grandparents, just like the American scientist who came up to me a few years ago. Women participants said that they had changes in their bodies during a heat wave. Some of them said that they had a higher rate of water retention related to their pregnancy, and some others said that they had worse symptoms related to the menopause. All of these impacts mean that people may have taken actions to just cope with the heat. Some people walked their dog earlier in the day to avoid the midday sun. But what I found that came out most is that a lot of people mentioned that they worried about their loved ones, they checked in on people, and they looked out for each other. I think viewing the climate crisis through the lens of us just being humans, and thinking more about how we'd like to live in this world together, is a powerful way to motivate all of us to do more about the climate crisis. We absolutely need to be mitigating climate change right now. In fact, we needed to mitigate climate change a few decades ago because the science was already very clear back then. Human activity has caused a steep global temperature rise that we've observed in our records. And our human influence on the climate system has, to a large extent, made a lot of the extreme weather events that we've experienced worse. Ourselves, our loved ones, and our future generations will be bearing the consequences of us not acting fast enough. In fact, a lot of us are already bearing the consequences. of us not acting fast enough. But in my day job, I focus a lot on the negative consequences of climate change because these are what we need to prepare ourselves for. But where I see risk, I also see human resilience. I find evidence of people looking out for each other in an extreme heat event through the responses from the survey that I just talked about. And I see a lot of evidence of children of today caring for the climate now. A lot of children have written on these little tags about how they cope with extreme heat and how they care for the environment, do anything for the environment, to me and my colleagues. A lot of these mention that they stay in shade or stay out of the heat in a heat wave, and also they do recycling for the environment. And I find it so heartwarming to see, because this shows me that there's a lot of awareness of climate change and what we should be doing about it in today's children. And I think this awareness must have stemmed from our awareness as adults about the climate crisis. So there's our awareness about the environment and the climate crisis. There's human instinct of all of us to protect and to connect with other people. And combine these with what I see in this future generation about their creativity and curiosity about the future, these things still give me hope for the future, even in the face of dangerous climate change. Thank you.